On July 21st, 1993, Dr. Avraham Biran, an Israeli archaeologist, discovered a remarkable stone bearing an inscription written in ancient Aramaic. He had found the first reference outside the Bible to King David and a ruling dynasty, evidence of the house of David.
Raise up a king, one of your own. Call him to lead us, establish his throne. I have chosen a shepherd after my heart, King of my people, my anointed one.
Shalom, hello again. Well, we're here at David's Tower outside the old city of Jerusalem, and we are doing programs on the life and legacy of King David. This, of course, inspired by the wonderful find of the House of David stone last year in Galilee, and a real proof of the existence of this dynasty. And we've come to Jerusalem, a place of a complex political situation for 3,000 years. There's something about this place. You have to see it to begin to understand it. Let me put it that way. You sure can't understand it from America because the media distorts it so ridiculously. I don't know how to find words. You cannot learn anything at all about Jerusalem or about Israel from the American media other than it's a bad idea. I don't know. Israel is a democracy and therefore allows a free press. The free press comes and they favor making it a dictatorship. If anyone can explain that to me, how about writing to me and telling me? Why the media favors a 23rd Arab dictatorship where there is already a democracy in place is the mystery of my lifetime. There is no reporting, of course, from any Arab country, ever. It is not allowed. And 200 million people, Arab people, have disappeared so far as news stories go. If you ever hear the news from the interior of Syria or Libya or Jordan or Iran or Iraq or Egypt or anywhere that's not a government news release, let me know. I'd love to hear what happened to those 200 million people. We discussed the media and its problems with a real Israeli expert, David Bar-Illan. He is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and he regularly writes a column called Eye on the Media. David Bar-Illan, it's always a pleasure. You've been with us before. I wanted to ask you, you are the editor of the Jerusalem Post. It used to be the Palestine Post, now it's the Jerusalem Post. But Jerusalem's in question at the moment. Arafat has made a statement that it really is the capital of a new country of Palestine.
Yeah, well, you see, the Jewish connection to Jerusalem is something absolutely unique in history. Ever since it became the capital of King David 3,000 years ago, it's been the city that symbolized the connection of the Jews to the land. For 3,000 years, they've considered it their capital. And that's, as I say, unique in history because out of those 3,000, 2,000 years, Jews had no sovereignty in this almost 2,000 years, and had no sovereignty in this country. And nevertheless, in the diaspora, everywhere Jews were, they would pray every single day next year in Jerusalem. The connection, Jerusalem symbolized the link to a land which was the source of Judaism and the birthplace of the culture and the religion of Judaism. As you probably know, the Bible mentions Jerusalem, the Hebrew Bible mentions Jerusalem something like 650 times. It is a central concept, not only a town, not only a city, not only a capital, but a central concept in the Hebrew Bible. Now, when Arafat says that it is also central to Islam, it is, to be charitable about it, a falsehood because of the fact that in the Quran, Jerusalem is never mentioned, not even once. there is absolutely no relation to Jerusalem in the Islamic religion. As a matter of fact, it's a deliberate divorce from anything that has anything to do with Jerusalem, because originally, Muhammad thought of preempting the Jewish faith and its belief in Jerusalem, and commanded his followers to bow to Jerusalem. When he realized that he couldn't do that, that he couldn't preempt Judaism as such, he made a holy place out of Mecca and Medina. You very often hear that Jerusalem is the third most holy place to Islam. That's also let's say again, charitably an exaggeration, because you will hear exactly the same thing about the third most important place, or the third holiest place, about many other cities in Islam, in Iraq, in Iran, in Turkey. Anything that's not Mecca and Medina can be called the third most important, the third most religious, the third holiest. And lastly, all you have to do is go to the Temple Mount here, where the two mosques, one of them actually is a mosque, the other one is not truly a mosque, exist, and you will see the Muslims there praying, but it is the backside that is turned to the mosques on the Temple Mount, and their faces which are turned to Mecca, towards the east, because Mecca is the central, the equivalent of Jerusalem perhaps to Islam in their faith. So to compare the two is really, I think, nonsense, and I'm afraid that Jews, as well as many others, have contributed to this by saying Jerusalem is holy to the three religions, to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. I've actually seen a television program recently in which the man says all three religions originated in Jerusalem. That's really just plain false. Of course, Judaism and Christianity originated in Jerusalem, yes, and it is holy to both these religions, but it has absolutely nothing to do, well, I shouldn't say nothing, but it has very little to do with Islam. And to say that it is equal in its importance in the religion of Islam is a falsehood.
Technically, could they say, in view of the fact that they conquered even Spain, let's say, or even over into the Orient, could they take a city there and declare it holy by the same reasoning?
But the fact is that when they captured it, they never declared it holy. And the fact is that they had a rule over the city for quite a while, for a few hundred years, in the Middle Ages, and and of course when they first captured it in the 7th century, but they never declared it holy. Also, they never had it as a capital of anything at all. Throughout Arab and Muslim rule, and I think one should also separate the two, because there was a long Turkish rule here, which was not Arab, but Muslim, it was never a capital of anything, not even of a region, not even of a district. The capital in this country was Ramleh, which is a town you're probably familiar with, near Tel Aviv. There's never been a Jerusalem, an important Jerusalem in Islamic history. But now, since there is a dispute over the city, and since they have developed a certain kind of fealty to the city and to the Temple Mount, and because they want to deprive Judaism and the State of Israel of its capital, they are claiming that it is really the capital of Islam, or should belong to Islam and not to Judaism. I think it's preposterous, and I think that we should make it very clear that we consider it preposterous. And I think that on that there is, even in this very contentious nation, there is a consensus of opinion, that is that Jerusalem belongs to the Jewish people, and it is indivisible as the capital of Israel under Israel's sovereignty.
One of the themes of our series is King David, and we're looking at a time today that seems almost similar, because then there was a peace process going on, there were wars on the borders, there were internal conflict and so on, and actually peace was achieved under King Solomon, the temple was built and so on. But it brings to mind that David and Solomon didn't rule here quietly. They built enormous structures. They're still here. There's a huge archaeological park at the village of Silwan down the hill from the Temple Mount, and
it is the city of David, by the way.
It's the city of David, exactly. And yet today, I talked to a man of Silwan who said, "This is my village, Palestinian territory to which Jews push their way in, etc." How is the reasoning, really, I know it's a falsehood, but what's the reasoning to say when the archaeology is looking you right in the face and it's on the hillside, and you have none of your own to compare with it, and your religion is younger by more than 2,000 years. What is the logic to say they were pushed out of a village?
No. A person who lives in a village and who is pushed out has a reason to say, I'm being pushed out. The fact is that the village is younger than the Jewish claim to the land does not mean that he's not perhaps suffering. It so happens that there are houses that we are talking about in the city of David were Jewish-owned houses until very recently. The Jews were kicked out of there in a pogrom, in a racist, anti-Semitic action, a violent action against Jews only a few decades ago. We're not talking about ancient history. We're not talking about biblical times. We're not talking about a claim that goes back, only a claim that goes back 3,000 years. We're talking about a very real claim to the house, which was built by Jews, inhabited by Jews, and from which Jews were kicked out as a result of an anti-Semitic pogrom. It's the same thing as happened in Hebron, where Jews lived for at least 1,000 years, more actually, because they, as you know, it was really David's first capital before Jerusalem became the capital of King David.
And Abraham,
of course, but we're talking about much more recent times. In 1929, there were Jewish families living there. There's still survivors of those families. And they were kicked out. After 67 of them were murdered in a pogrom. The rest had to leave, and it's those houses that are reclaimed. No Jew, no Israeli has displaced an Arab who lived in an Arab home, in an Arab house, in a house that belonged to Arabs traditionally and to the Arab families there. We're talking about houses that actually belong to Jews in our time. We're not talking about biblical times. The media try to very often picture this as a war between a nation that came back to claim something that was its own 1,000 years ago. That's not true at all. There's never been a time in which Jews did not live in this country. And we're talking about real people, about people who lived in certain houses, who were kicked out of those houses, who were chased away by violence, terrorism, and murder. And they're claiming their houses back. We're talking about this generation, last generation, 2 generations ago. We're not talking just about the historic, cultural, biblical claim to the land.
David, I take the Jerusalem Post International edition. I always read your column, Eye on the Media, which they bury in this little magazine, and yet I tell them I'm pulling out that magazine, opening that before I read the front page. But it's fascinating, and you have your eye on the media, and you're the man above all to ask, but why? Lama, why is there such a bias against Israel in the democratic Western media?
I don't think I know the complete answer. And first, I'd like to say that it's not shared by everybody. I don't want to make this kind of a blanket accusation. There are many people in the media who are fair and who write even-handedly about the country, and that's all I think we can ask for. But there is, I don't know what has caused this kind of concept of the conflict here, which makes Israel the Goliath and the Palestinians the David in this scenario, in this confrontation. It's perhaps something that is an achievement of Arab propaganda, and perhaps it is an invention of the media. I don't really know what has caused it. But they view it as some kind of a mixture between Alabama and Algeria. That is, Alabama in the sense that the downtrodden, the deprived, the underprivileged are the Palestinians, and we are the whites in this scenario, you know, who are depriving them of their rights. Nothing could be further from the truth, as you probably know, and I'll be happy to elaborate on it. And there's also the Algeria element, that we are somehow the colonialists who have come here, have taken a land away from its people, have dispossessed the natives of this country, the indigenous population, and they are taking over, like the French did in Algeria, and that is why we are committing a colonialist injustice. This is obviously also total nonsense, but our media today, perhaps under the influence of television, do not look at things in context, in any kind of a historical context. context. I often compare it to what would happen if a television crew came to view the Normandy invasion, which is now we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of it, and saw only the invasion itself, and the fact that the first day 6,000 Frenchmen were killed by bombings of the Allied forces, and this kind of havoc, this kind of brutality, this kind of mass murder would be pictured as something absolutely horrible, and the villains would be the Allies, not the Nazis who were defending a country, you see. That's the kind of thing that happens if you look at history only on the basis of the moment rather than the basis of what had happened before. Of course, we are not invaders here. There was practically nothing in this country when we came. It was barren. I still remember it, and I'm not quite that old, and I still remember it as a barren desert with swamps, which became a blooming paradise, relatively speaking, because of the arrival of the Zionists here. And the Arabs who live in this country today are a result of the kind of prosperity that we created here, the kind of attraction that we created here to Arabs from around us, from neighboring countries, who came here because we made work available to them and because we made it possible for them to enjoy the kind of standard of living which they do not and cannot enjoy in any other, in any Arab country. So the myth has been created, and the media are watching it from a point of view of what happens from one moment to another, and picture it in terms of a fight between the strong Israelis and the weak Palestinians. The fact that the minute we try to establish a state of Israel here, we were invaded by 7 Arab armies. The fact that they've been trying to destroy us now for 100 years is something that the media have very little time for, and that you never see.
When we return, we'll talk further about Israel and the media with Member of Parliament opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu.
The principal method applied by the enemies of the Jewish people and of Zionism and of the Jewish state is slander and is lies.
From the lofty heights of Mount Hermon to the lowest spot on earth, from the bustling streets of Jerusalem to the tranquil shores of Galilee, from the crystal clear waters of En-Gedi to the stark beauty of an arid wilderness, the Holy Land, a place of fascinating contrast that will enrich your life, historically, spiritually. See the Holy Land with Zola Levitt. For more information, call her right today.
13 miles wide.
Benjamin Netanyahu was kind enough to recently grant us an interview in an office at the Knesset. I asked him about the peace process.
Because, you know, we're not hearing this side of it at all in America. I can tell you, well, you know. But 24 hours a day, it's a happy creation of a new state. It's Arafat is a statesman. It's only for the good. There's peace. It's called a peace process.
Well, it's not called a peace process by Arafat. Maybe in English, maybe to American audiences, but in Arabic or to Islamic audiences, he says something very different. He was recently in a mosque in Johannesburg, speaking to an Islamic gathering. And he said, this wasn't publicized obviously, but the tape was later smuggled and made public. He said, I'm not signing a peace treaty with Israel. I'm conducting a jihad to liberate Jerusalem. Now, jihad, as your audience may know, is a holy war for extermination of the infidel, of the enemy, the infidel being either Jew or Christian. And he said something else. He said, all I'm doing is what the Prophet Muhammad did with the Quraysh tribe in Saudi Arabia. Now, Muhammad, many centuries ago, wanted to conquer the Arabian Peninsula. There was a particularly tough tribe called the Quraysh tribe that stood in his way, and he couldn't defeat them. Since he couldn't defeat them, he made a peace treaty with them. And 2 years later, when he gathered enough force, he tore up the peace treaty and slaughtered the entire Quraysh tribe, right to the last man, woman, and child. Arafat says, several weeks ago in Johannesburg, and just yesterday again This is the peace of Quraysh. In other words, it's a peace merely as an interlude in a larger war and as a prelude to the war that is meant to annihilate Israel. That's not peace. So I would be very careful of calling it a peace process. It's not a peace process. Arafat himself explains it's a jihad process. It's the opposite of peace.
We have obtained a copy of Arafat's speech given on May 10, 1994 in Johannesburg. Speaking before fellow Muslims, he says, "I can't do it alone. No, you have to come and to fight and to start the jihad to liberate Jerusalem. We are in need of you as Muslims, as warriors of jihad."
Yeah, you strike me personally as a character like Nehemiah or one of these governors of Israel that insisted to rebuild the place. And the scripture actually points out they had a brick in one hand and a sword in the other. And it's almost, I see the cranes and I see the soldiers.
But today there's a different method of attacking. Today, the principal battle against Israel is not the battle of bullets or even the battle of bombs, although we have plenty of those being launched against us. The principal method applied by the enemies of the Jewish people and of Zionism and of the Jewish state is slander and is lies. That's what they do.
Yes.
They've conducted a terrific campaign to reverse, to stand things on their head. It is not the Arabs who attack the Jews, but the Jews who attack the Arabs. It is not they who attacked us from Judea and Samaria and we who defended ourselves and gained re-entry into these territories as a process, but we who sought out to attack them in the first place. It is not they who possess 21 states, 500 times the size of Israel, but we who have this huge, monstrous state that can fit in as I said, under my thumb in a map, and so on. The complete devastation of truth has been the principal Arab weapon against the Jews, and it's meant to erode the conception of Jews and non-Jews alike around the world to say, you cannot support Israel because justice is not on Israel's side. And if you can succeed in persuading enough people that our cause, the cause of Israel, is unjust, people will, of course, abandon you because naturally decent people everywhere want to support what is just and not what is unjust. But in fact, I would say, there has never been an example of David standing up to Goliath of a more just and more noble battle than the battle of the Jewish people to reestablish itself in its homeland.
To wrap it up, I want to ask you only about the future, if you can say, your own and Israel's. What sense do you have of what's going to happen?
My own future is irrelevant. The future of Israel is relevant. I think that the fact that there is a sobering up process after the immediate euphoria following the signing of the accords with the PLO, the fact that people are asking Arafat to live up to his commitments, and he's not, has caused a sea change of opinion in Israel. And I think that that's a good sign. It means that the people here are not putting their heads in the sand, that even though they want peace, pray for peace, they can see a fake peace when it explodes in front of their faces. And I think this means that we'll have a good chance of forming a future government that would seek a genuine peace, a peace based on security, and a peace based on the truth, on the Jewish people's right to this minimal speck of land, a dusty strip at the edge of Asia, where the Jewish people can come back and live again in peace and in security with its neighbors.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem is certainly an appropriate message for the times. You know, Jerusalem really does have a very happy ending. Believers know, my gosh, it's the capital of the kingdom. It's the home of the king. The Lord will be there. David himself will be there, as will the rest of the resurrected saints of all ages. And David, my servant, will rule over them, it says in Ezekiel 37. And Jerusalem's pictured as, boy, Zechariah 8:3, thus saith the Lord, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. And it says the old men and women will dwell in the streets, and the streets shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets thereof. This is now true in the Jewish quarter, at least, of Jerusalem. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, if it be marvelous in the eyes of the remnant of this people in these days, should it also be marvelous in mine eyes, saying the Lord of hosts. And it goes on and on. Beautiful. Unfortunately, we have a blinded media covering the place now, making it seem like some capital of a banana republic shooting in the streets. It's absurd. When we go on our tours, we see nothing of the sort. The 30-second video is destroying Israel, just as the 30-second video destroyed our last election here. Negative commentary for 30 seconds, no discussion, and on to the next one. And Jewish commentators stand there in Israel, ignorant of the Old Testament, ignorant of where they are. It wouldn't matter if they were in Johannesburg or London or Beijing, and give this gobbledygook, this biased anti-Israel stuff they call the news these days. Since David made it the capital, I don't know if it's seen such strife as it has today. We are offering our House of David stone again. David did make it the capital. His house did exist, and the proof of it is on the stela from which we took our little model of the stone. You can read Beit David, House of David. I mean, if you can read some Hebrew or Aramaic. And it is a wonderful thing to have. And also, we're going to offer that to you for $29. It's kind of a keepsake of the series. Also, we have 4 collar pins. We haven't done this before, but we thought you'd get a kick out of it. $5, okay? And one says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. One says, shalom. One says, chai, for life, and so on. You'll enjoy these things or pass them around. This is a good time to wear them. $5 for the set of the 4 collar pins. $29 for the model of the House of David stone. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Praise